very involved with CAPI, and so hopefully we will not miss a beat during this transition. I am so happy to see all of you here. Thank you guys for schlepping through the snow to make it today. It's a great turnout, especially considering what terrible weather we've had. We're really excited about the discussion today. I think this is a really interesting topic that has not gotten enough attention. And I just want to thank Jack and CohnReznick for being our sponsors for this today. They have been true friends to CAPI, and we really greatly appreciate their support of our center. If you haven't had a chance yet to sign in, make sure you do on the way out so you can get CLE credit. We have some written materials up there as well. I've met some of you in person. If I haven't, after this, please either come up and say hi or reach out. We're always looking for new ideas and new friends for the center, so I'll be pleased to meet all of you in person. With that, I'll turn it over to Jack.
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you getting here this morning. It was interesting. I think if we can create these kinds of events, all we have to do is schedule events and we create all kinds of weather problems. But we're glad to see the folks in this business, in the integrity monitoring work, kind of getting used to braving through storms and through difficult times. My name is Jack Callahan, and I have the honor of heading up the construction and engineering practice at CohnReznick. We're the 11th largest accounting firm in the country. And I got involved in the integrity monitoring space. It was 17 years ago, the tragic events of 9/11. I got a phone call. We had $1 billion project, no plans, no specs, no contracts. We need an accountant. And I said, boy, thank you for the honor. I don't know what I can help, but walked onto the site and had a chance to meet some of the individuals here that are still working with all these years later, and said, you know what, we can restore some integrity. We can get involved. We can remind people what's right and how to get things done the right way. Representing contractors on a day-to-day basis, we had that kind of conflict early on. I said, wait, if I represent contractors, now I'm in this role of integrity and oversight. And talking to my partners and talking to the management at CohnReznick, we said, you know what, it's simple. We have the same mission, we have the same goals and drives. We want our contractors' clients to be held to the highest level of integrity and responsibility. And if our clients want to perform to that level and hold themselves accountable, and we're now working for the agency side, enforcing those, those core values and those integrity issues, we're on the same pages. And what was great was meeting folks like Ron and the people from the mayor's office at the time at Ground Zeroes. We don't want to prosecute. We're not looking to get people. We're not looking to set up prosecutions. We want you to get in their face early and often, remind them how to do things the right way. And if they do things the right way, everyone will get paid, everyone will succeed, and this project will be done in the right kind of form and fashion. I'm very proud all these years later. I think we accomplished that mission, and we continue to do it today. So that was kind of my introduction to integrity monitoring. And again, it's about preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. So when I got this chance, we have had the honor of working with CAPI now for a number of years. As a firm, CohnReznick, we believe in the mission of CAPI, and we believe in supporting it, so we're very happy to have this opportunity. We got talking with Jennifer and with Barrett about what kind of programs. We believe that this integrity monitoring model is something that should be accepted much more and embraced by the private developers, by other public agencies, as opposed to the couple of large agencies that use it right now. So let's explain it, let's get out and have a forum. And was able to reach out to some great friends in the industry and got a tremendous panel. And Steve is arriving right on time. Well done, Mr. Pate.
Thank you.
Steve Plate is one of our panelists, and Steve is the Chief of Major Capital Projects for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. In that role, he's done the planning and the construction of the World Trade Center site, the Bayonne Bridge, Gateway Tunnel, Port Authority Bus Terminal, Path to Newark projects. So some of the largest multi-billion-dollar projects that have been the backbone of the Port Authority's capital construction program. So Steve, thank you for weathering the traffic and getting here a little bit late, but thanks. Then we've got Judge Holdman, judge retired from the New York State Supreme Court, and has presided in Brooklyn, Bronx, and Westchester County courts. He's now engaged in broadly based consultancy focused on advising business individuals and the media on issues of law and ethics. Leah Ramos is the Regulatory Compliance Counsel for Structure Tone, and also an adjunct professor in law for Fordham Law Schools. The competition, how does it feel to be in Columbia?
That's okay.
I always said my grandmother would be so proud. She wanted to be an attorney. So I got to Columbia, Grandma. It's okay. And then Ron Calvosa. Ron is a certified Inspector General and certified fraud examiner. He now has the pleasure of being the Executive Director of the Association of Inspectors General. So we met Ron 17 years ago when he was with the New York City Inspector General's office and the Port Authority Inspector General's office, New York City DOI, I guess at the time, right, Ron?
Yep.
Yep. And so Ron is now, in his role as director, is running an agency that's about promoting the benefits of Inspector Generals across the country. Our final panelist is Michael Carroll. Michael is the managing director in K2's Intelligent Investigations and Disputes Practice, with a focus on construction and real estate services. Prior to that, Mike worked with the New York City Department of Investigation. So that's our panel, and hopefully you will get a lot from these people who've got a lot of first-hand experience. So what I thought I'd do right away is kind of turn it over to each of our panelists and kind of what their role has been in the world of integrity monitoring, and then we'll get into some of our questions and answers. With this audience that we have here, we're welcome to be as proactive as you want. Please raise hands, let's ask questions. The panel, I'm sure, can handle any of the questions that you might want to throw their way. So, Steve, are you ready to get started, or take away on kind of what your experience has been?
Sure. Is this on, or can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I wasn't prepared to give a speech, but I'm always loved giving speeches. So I'm actually a receiver of the benefits of an IG. I will tell you, when I started, all my compatriots said, "Really, you want to encourage an IG to be part of your team?" And I said, "Absolutely." We wanted to know at World Trade, real time, what's not going right and what is going right, and we wanted them embedded with us, which they were. Just the magnitude of the size of the project, it was $25 billion over a 10-year period. We were spending $2.5 billion per year, which was unprecedented by the Port Authority. And I was writing checks personally to contractors, consultants, all different walks of life, upwards of over $250 million a month. So we had 26,000 people involved with the project. We had about 10,000 of them on site. So obviously, I had a lot of people wanted to be my friend. With the other projects I have, they continue to want to be my friend. And if they want to be my friend, the thing they found was that they had to be in my office at 6 in the morning and leave somewhere around 10, 11 at night. And that wasn't very popular for them. But anyway, just to give you, by the way, I should ask, how much time do you want me? I don't want to monopolize. So, another minute?
Yeah, another minute.
Another minute. So, what did they do for me? They embedded with us, but really, what they did is they set a standard of high integrity, and we became, and some of them, I'm dating myself, but you remember the NASA project? Computers came out of that, and all sorts of things, great things. Well, I call World Trade the new NASA project. Integrity was one of those things that came out of it. Also came out of it safety. I insisted in 35 construction staff hours, my biggest and most proudest things, we had 0 fatalities, unheard of in the history of the world. Knock on wood. I always thank you for knocking on wood. I always knock on wood. And that's because we saw something, we said something. And we didn't sit there and let Ron, and by the way, Ron was the prime mover on this. He'll tell you more about it. But we didn't just say, okay, go do your job. We became part of them. So when I left 10 at night, and it was changing a culture. I was a construction worker. I was local 731. My family were all construction workers, and my mother insisted both my brother and I go back to make sure we went to college. I went to Manhattan. I apologize. That's just a rivalry, none of you got. But anyway, I went to Manhattan, became an engineer, and became a builder. And as part of that, I learned a lot as far as what the culture was back then. I remember people getting quarts of beer at lunchtime brought up to them from the water boy. I remember people smoking on the job. I remember people being a little rough. We had to change a culture. And they weren't bad people, there just was certain cultures that developed for decades and centuries, and we had to change that culture. So we were very communicative. I mean, we saved lives. I mean, there were people, you know, we made them tie off. They didn't want to tie off. We insisted they tie off, and occasionally something would happen, and they would have fell to their death that they were tied off. So we were very proud of that. As much as we were a bit of a pain in the neck, we accomplished what we needed to accomplish. We did great things. We got rid of the bad guys. We told everybody, we raised people better than they ever could be. We helped them along. We didn't play guy. It wasn't a game of gotcha, and I look around the room, many of you in this room were part of this. We educated people. We educated ourselves. We challenged ourselves. And we were part of that team, whether it be, you know, things like we were going 24 hours a day, and I'd walk by a local pub, and there might be a few people with vests on that were sitting at the bar. And I informed Ron, who sent people out. We brought them out. We said, okay, never again. And we stopped that. If you remember Uptown, they found people, it was all over the newspaper. We dealt with the problems. We took care of our own family. We actually, after we took care of it, we announced what we did, so everybody knew we were transparent. We didn't hide anything, but we took care of our problems within. And the fact that if you walk around World Trade, you see the success of World Trade, it's not just about construction and steel. It's about people being better than they ever thought they could be, and by people such as you and your industry, helping them to strive to that goal.
Thanks, Steve. Leah, from the contractor standpoint,
Sure.
your role and how you've seen it play out.
Sure. So I don't know if you can tell, but I did not come over to Structure Tone with a background in actually working in construction. I came over from the New York State Joint Commission on Public Ethics, and really I came over as part of Structure Tone's efforts to build out its compliance program. And a lot of that is third-party due diligence and third-party risk management. So Structure Tone has over 2,000 employees in 31 offices across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Ireland, but we do not self-perform. We engage, I think probably over the life of the company, over 10,000 subcontractors, probably about 6,000 active right now, and so you can imagine the kind of due diligence that goes into vetting a subcontractor pool like that. And so we have a very comprehensive, a very robust third-party risk management program. Part of that is onboarding and pre-qualification, continuously monitoring subcontractors so that you're not looking at them, you know, at one snapshot in time and then not assessing them for another year. But it also means putting in risk remediation measures. If you do find that there is a regulatory issue, a financial issue, a safety issue. And so part of that is overseeing subcontractors that we require to have a monitor. And so that's where my experience is in it. And as well, you know, Structure Tone has had some regulatory history. And so, you know, part of the effort to build out its compliance program would be some of the same things that a monitor would do. Strengthening the internal controls, putting in new corporate governance measures, you know, having a compliance program that reports directly to the board, things like that. So it's both on both ends. We've been sort of overhauling our compliance program, but at the same time overseeing subcontractors that we require to have a monitor.
Thanks. Judge, your role in the judiciary and then now in private practice, what's your role been in assigning integrity monitors to folks and then now working in that role? How do you see?
Well, I've been lucky enough to see it from three angles. As a prosecutor and understanding the mindset of law enforcement and the government and what they want done or adhere to. As a judge, my experience in evaluating the solutions as you look at it in the context of the letter of the law, and then on the aspect of the private side as to having to take on that role. So I've been lucky to have that unique position on all three points. What I think should be emphasized is, and I'm honored to sit here, but I humbly look at this crowd, and there is most, if not all, the people that we are addressing could exchange places with any of us up here. And I think what's most important is to keep this exchange of ideas and this flow of conversation to address the needs and address the issues and problems that we all see. So quite frankly, I think the communication is what's best served by panels like this.
Great, thanks. Ron, in your role as Inspector General and now with the agency that you oversee, kind of a little bit the history of what is an integrity monitor, how has it evolved, and how have you seen the evolution?
Sure. It certainly has evolved over the years from when it was first thought of and conceived out of the study that was done by the Organized Crime Task Force many years ago. I see Joe DeLuca is in the audience, and he was one of the authors of that study. And it was the study on corruption and racketeering in the New York City construction industry. And the concept was born of an independent auditor, independent inspector general, and that developed into an integrity monitor, which was used by the School Construction Authority Inspector General, and then the New York City Department of Investigation. And basically it was to help companies rehabilitate themselves or give the government some assurance that some bad past practices wouldn't occur again if you were going to contract with that company. Then the world changed on 9/11. When the attacks happened, terrible, tragic events of that day, I was the Inspector General for the Department of Design and Construction at the time, which was the agency responsible for the cleanup. And working with my supervisor, Stephen Pasichow, we were thrown into the concept of fraud prevention on a $1 billion cleanup operation, and that's, Jack alluded to it just a few minutes ago. You know, contractors were brought down onto the site. The site was divided into 4 quadrants. A construction manager was assigned to each quadrant. And within a week, there were articles in the paper about organized crime coming down to the World Trade Center, steel being stolen and diverted from its proper destination. And so the mayor at the time, Mayor Giuliani, Commissioner Kuryansky, said we have to address this. We're assigning integrity monitors to the projects. It wasn't that any of the particular companies working on the project had done anything wrong, but they wanted to assure that there was integrity. So the integrity monitors were assigned, and my role and Stephen Pasichow's role was to supervise the monitors. And, you know, it was something brand new. It was making sure that bills were paid properly, that there were no ghost employees. So we had people on site, you know, former NYPD detectives, former federal agents working for the integrity monitors, ultimately reporting to us. We had auditors and accountants, and Jack's firm played a big role on one of the quadrants down there. So our role turned to fraud prevention. And in addition to that, to detection and to assist in investigations. And there were bad people down there. There was a lot of money, and when you have money in a project, it attracts the worst in people. So there were different kinds of schemes that came out of that, and there were prosecutions that developed, and the integrity monitors were the ones to assist DOI at the time in fraud prevention and detection and investigation. And then my role kind of shifted. I had left DOI and I moved over to become the Director of Fraud Prevention at the Lower Manhattan Construction Command Center, and we had responsibility for projects south of Canal Street. So the integrity monitor concept kind of shifted over to the rebuilding effort. And after doing that for a couple of years and working together with the Port Authority Inspector General's office, I was fortunate to move into that position. And the Port Authority at the time, as Steve Plate indicated, the World Trade Center reconstruction. And it was decided that there needed to be integrity monitors on each of the projects. And you might look at the site and say, well, it's the World Trade Center site, but there were many separate projects down there, each of them so significant that an integrity monitor was assigned to each of the projects. From One World Trade Center, the Memorial and Museum, the Transportation Hub, and so forth. So again, the focus was on fraud prevention and detection. And it really was a career shift for me. I was a career investigator, always wanting to investigate different types of white-collar crime that was occurring, and bringing cases to prosecutors and have them prosecuted. But here was a different mindset. It was the fraud prevention. So, some tough decisions had to be made. If you find that there's a problem, what do? Do you bring it to the agency's attention and nip it in the bud? Or do you allow certain activity to continue so that you develop evidence and bring criminal prosecutions? And, as Steve indicated, and we're separated by a couple of seats here, but for a very long time at the Port Authority, we were actually kind of joined at the hip in Steve embracing the concept of having the IG's office and integrity monitors on our projects, because he viewed it that we were his insurance policy. We were there to protect him, and because of his positive reaction to us and working together as a team, our concept at the Port Authority developed into providing integrity monitors on several other major capital construction projects, which are still going on today.
Thanks, Ron. All those 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. is why Steve asked that I put Ron 2 seats away from him. Mike, in your role with the DOI and now in private practice, in your role as it's been in the integrity monitoring space?
So I started with the integrity monitoring world. I was introduced to it in around 2004. So I just left government early this year, and I got to say I see a lot of my former colleagues here and people I work with. I really much more enjoy being on that side of the table when I'm at meetings now. Now I'm on the private side, so it's a very different dynamic. But I was introduced to the concept in 2004. I was working for DOI. There was a big construction project up in the Bronx. There was a wastewater treatment plant. And at the time, I just got there. And part of my job was going to be to oversee that construction that took place. And I didn't really know much about the concept of monitorships. And my boss, John Cantor, at the time, came to me and said, look, we're going to hire monitors for this job. And my initial reaction was, I didn't like it. I was insulted by it. I'm like, I just came out of the NYPD. I was just with the DC Inspector General's office. I can handle this. Why do we need to bring in integrity monitors? So I was very resistant at first to the concept of it. And I'll get into it more later on, hopefully, and talk about it. But they quickly changed for me, because the big difference that I realized quickly is the benefit to monitors is the flexibility and the level of expertise. We had people at DOI that certainly investigators we had, and we had auditors, that could come in and help. But with that particular project, we needed 1 week we would need environmental specialists, and then 2 weeks later we would need an engineer, but only for 10 days. So, we had that flexibility with monitors where they're not full-time employees for us. We just say to the monitor, we need an engineer for 2 weeks, and we put them on the job. And then all of a sudden we need a forensic accountant for 2 weeks. And that flexibility and the high level of expertise, I realized quickly how invaluable that was. So although resistant in the beginning, I became, very much a proponent of it. And that was my first job, supervising a large group of monitors on that job site. And then as time went on, I took on more of a role with DOI with the monitoring program, to eventually running the program before I left. And even in my time at DOI, when I first started in 2004, we probably had around just 2 or 3 monitorships. We didn't have that many going at the time. And at the time, I think a lot of it was more reactive. We had problematic contractors that we were attached to. But in my time from 2004 to the time I left in the beginning of this year, it changed so much. We were juggling a few monitorships when I first started this. By the time I left, we were doing approximately 20 monitorships under various names. For those that didn't like to be, tagged with an integrity monitor, we called it something else. But we had 20 monitorships. We had a full unit that was just dedicated to this. It went from myself, Bob Joyce when he was there, and Ron, and we all kind of were winging it, and that was sort of our side job, doing monitorships, to the point where we had to put a dedicated staff, to work the monitorships. And I think that it changed from 3 or 4 to 20 as it is today, or somewhere in that range, because the concept did change from, as Ron alluded to, the bad actor focus to being very proactive. And I feel like there were 2 big incidents that really changed that mindset to proactive. 9/11 was one, and then Hurricane Sandy. Those were two big events where people really realized the value of getting out in front of it. And I'm a big proponent of private or government. It doesn't really matter. It's the same concept. But those two moments were really pushed proactive monitorships forward and changed a lot. And I hope to get into Sandy a little bit later on and tell you a little bit about the benefits that I saw that came out of that type of monitorship.
Great, thanks, Mike. I guess we get to Steve. What we've heard, Mike's initial reaction was he was offended at having to work with an integrity monitor. And I think, Leah, you can touch base from the contractor's side. And when we address public owners, we address private owners, and we talk about it, we've changed the words integrity with compliance monitors, oversight, trying to make it sound less offensive to work with those agencies. But everybody's reaction is, I have a construction manager, I have a CM, I have our own oversight controls. And Steve, obviously you're charged with building it. You're charged with getting the construction done, but why have you embraced it and said, you know what, this doesn't get in the way of construction, this complements construction? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. At a macro level, when I took over World Trade, I remember turning to people. I was excited the first day, and then I realized no one's ever done anything of this scale in the greatest city in the world. And my approach to it was to be open to everything, try different things. There was no book. We had to write the book. And when Mike Nesta, Steve Pasiccio, and Ron came to us with this offer, most people, I'm telling you, people thought we were crazy to accept it. And I felt I want to be better every day than I was the day before. I want to learn. Successful people, I read a lot, and successful people never stop learning. And they have respect for everybody. And believe it or not, I even bring a lot of young people in my office, okay, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And they'll tell me. And I learn a lot. A little background to my approach to this. I learned a tremendous amount from this group. And I'll be honest with you, at times I used them as a shield because I was getting a lot of subtle offers. And I remember calling Ron and Steve. I said, this guy, and I'm not talking money, a little bit, a cup of coffee, a little bit of this. I took nothing. Because you know what I would say to the contractor? I don't want you in trouble, I don't want me in trouble, and I want to do right by you and not you feel that I did it because you bought me that cup of coffee or you gave me tickets to a game. I use Steve and Joe and everybody else, and many people in this room, and Ron, as a friend that I could respect and ask for guidance. It would be like I hate to use the analogy, but it's like talking to a structural engineer and saying, you think the beam will hold it, let's talk about it, let's go through it. But this is more organic. It's almost a psychology course. And we muscled through some very challenging discussions. And the word got out, if you're going to play games, need not apply. Need not apply. And I became a kind of a pseudo IG at some point. In fact, they used to tease me, you're doing a lousy imitation of us. But, you guys out there, many of the integrity monitors were part of the family and part of the fabric that made this miracle happen in Lower Manhattan. And it took a lot of pain and suffering to watch all the details. And there wasn't a book. There wasn't a book that said, okay, if he offers you coffee, turn it down. If he does this, we had to sit there and do 360s, and we'd sit in the room or we'd talk on the phone. Sometimes I'd say, let me think about it overnight, Ron would say, and let me get back to you. And it wasn't just me. It became a point where I didn't reach out to them. My staff reached out to every one of them and asked for their guidance, whether it be Joe, whether it be Ron, whether it be Steve. It was just that kind of way. And the big thing, for anybody on big projects, what I tell people, the biggest thing, the worst thing that can happen, you finish a job like this, right? What happens? The IG comes in and does a report. It says there was theft here, there was theft here. So everybody's given applaud. What is the fifth stage of a project, they say? Indictment of the innocent, right? or at least people tell me that. My point is, they're telling us real time, we're concerned about this, let's talk about it. The CM isn't doing something, your guys aren't doing something. And quite often it's communication. You know, it's like, no, there wasn't anything nefarious about it. We're just either ignorant or the intent was good. Do you disagree? So it was a real-time resource, as opposed to getting a report 10 years after a project or 5 years after a project's done, submit it to Congress or wherever it goes, have hearings, and, you know, for no other reason other than people just didn't do it on a real-time basis, they had to deal with it. So for me, I'd recommend it anyway. And by the way, I'm trying to fill in the blanks here. The federal government came to us and got so excited by what we did, is now adopted for many of their projects as a standard. So it has really become something, you know, I joke about it, World Trade. A lot of people take a lot of credit for great ideas that many of my staff do, and they get upset. And I says, no, you know, imitation's, you know, a great compliment. And we've become the model with the integrity monitors. We spent $60 million in integrity monitors, but we spent $25 billion. $60 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're looking at all these people come from every direction, what would have happened would have been, there would have been a lot of gamesmanship going on, a lot of bad press, good firms would not apply, it would cost you a lot of money. But equally as important, a project of this importance, and this is really about America, and it's not just America, it's about the world. You know, this was 100 different countries were attacked by what happened here, and we had to be as pure as we humanly can, and thanks to the IG and their efforts, we are there and very proud of it, and it will be a model for decades and centuries to come.
Thanks, and you guys be happy to know I've responded to RFPs in Chicago and Long Beach, California, and they were your RFPs. They copied them straight up. So you know what? The message is getting out, and that's been one of the good things. And so it's kind of neat. Ron, maybe follow up on that a little bit. How is the role of the IG, the Inspector General, and the role of the Integrity Monitor really enhanced the construction side of this project and kept these things on target and on track and out of the newspapers for the wrong reasons?
Well, you know, for a lot of reasons. I mean, you know, I spoke kind of from the investigator perspective, where you want to have prevention on, you know, to prevent different types of crime, but it was more than that. And, you know, Steve mentioned it before about safety. So one of the things that our integrity monitor did was point out that there weren't sufficient controls in place to vet contractors and their safety records coming on site. That was very important. So recommendations are made. They're embraced by Steve Plate and his staff. That's the kind of relationship and teamwork that was necessary and made this successful. So it starts with putting those controls in place, vetting from a safety perspective the contractors coming on. And then after that, looking at the safety program and coming up with further recommendations saying, hey, there aren't enough safety people out there monitoring these contractors. Because, you know, as it was alluded to before, some of these contractors and contract workers, very hard workers, but some of them were old school. So, you know, not being tied off, wearing a safety harness, smoking on the job site, drinking on the job site. These were things that they were used to. The culture, as Steve indicated, had to be changed. Our integrity monitors were able to address those issues, both being on site and making observations, but more so making recommendations. And the teamwork approach of us at the IG's office, taking that information to the project in real time, and being embraced, and all of a sudden, there is a whole safety unit and a safety director at the World Trade Center site now, focusing on safety, not the integrity monitor. Our job is to be, you know, the integrity monitor's job is to be the extra set of eyes, looking at it from the outside looking in. Now it was being addressed. And I think that, you know, credit is due to Steve. He mentioned it before. know that's on this project, when you think about the amount of man-hours, the amount of money being spent on the job. So credit to Steve for that, and credit to Steve for these projects being built. They're amazing projects, unprecedented, and they were built. And Steve made sure that they were built. And our job at the Inspector General's office in using the integrity monitors was to make sure that they were built with integrity.
Thanks, Rob. Leah, jumping from the Joint Commission on Public Ethics and going to work for a contractor, how did it work for you? And was it the stark contrast, or was there a lot of complementary to what your role was going to be in the company on the private side and what you've been in the public sector?
Sure, I think there is a stark contrast, because I think when you come from government, you expect that there is this basic level of a culture of compliance. And most of the resistance, I think, in construction is cultural, right? I remember last holiday season, I went down to get coffee, and a subcontractor had sent over a 6-foot hero and a giant cannoli, and I came from the government where we got nothing for free, so I said, this is fantastic. And this super who was standing next to me, he was like, you should have seen it years ago. We had lobster, they were sending over vodka, and he's like, and then compliance came, and I was like, hi, I'm compliance counsel for the company. So there's definitely a difference, but I think that people are starting to recognize the value in compliance and the value in having a high integrity culture, and really what it comes down to is that good ethics is good for business. And when you sit down with clients that are big banks and they have very sophisticated compliance programs, they expect us to have the same level of compliance, and they expect us to pick up on regulatory hits in our subcontractor pool that they would find, and we want to find them first. And that's a value add for clients, and it wins work. And getting even our folks to understand that this is good for business, it can be a challenge. And when we sit with subcontractors and we say, listen, you've had some regulatory history, this is really the kind of thing where, it's not enough to just take our anti-corruption training, it's not enough for your, sometimes we'll have employees of a subcontractor review our supplier code of conduct, conduct by which they're all bound through their agreements, but having every employee working the job to actually review it and sign off on it, sometimes you need more to rehabilitate a sub, and it depends on the severity of the regulatory history, how pervasive it was. And the biggest resistance when we say, what about a monitor, is not the cost, is not whether there's going to be, it's going to slow down work. It's the stigma attached to a monitor. And they say, well, we've done nothing wrong. They think it's tantamount to an admission of guilt. Or they say, well, that was just a hiccup, it was a rogue employee, we don't need a monitor. And really getting them to see the value in a monitorship. And it's not just a quick fix, it's not just, are you going to perform on this job and you comply with the terms of this contract, but it's an overall health assessment. And it's a good idea for any organization, no matter how small, no matter what the trade is to say, where does my company stand? What's the culture of my company? What are the internal controls like? Is there a systemic weakness in our company? And how comfortable do employees feel speaking up? Can they go to someone outside the company if they see an ethical concern or if they have a question about a billing practice? And so really getting folks to see the value in a monitorship. It's not just a short-term fix. There's really a long-term value. There's tremendous value in having someone independent of your company come in and say, this is where you stand and this is what could be improved. It's something that we at Structure Tone do. It's doing an assessment every couple of years saying, are our policies easy to understand? Is our training relevant? Are we just, are employees just clicking through the screen saying, yes, 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 I agree? And are we keeping up with the times? For instance, if you work for the government, you know that you have to fill out a enormous conflicts of interest disclosure questionnaire, and conflicts are really tricky. They're hard for people to identify. And so when you're training employees, are you really getting to the conflicts that they're encountering in real life, and not just getting this sort of template, generic training, really tailoring your compliance to meet the risk that your specific organization faces.
Thank you. As a CPA who's represented contractors for over 35 years in this city, I've had clients, unfortunately, on the wrong side of those newspaper articles. We've gotten clients that have gotten in trouble, and I can tell you, in our firm, our compliance folks, I have a wonderful day when our clients make that front page of the newspaper, and they've got a problem. And what I've always been able to do is look our folks in the eye and say, you know what? I'll stand by good people who've done something dumb if they're really looking to make a change, but I don't want any part of working with bad people. And so that's how we've set our culture. And if I can have that argument, and so long as before that article hits, our client has shared with us what the problem was, what they've done, what their roles are. We're willing to work with them as a firm, and it's been great. And as I said, I think that works. Mike, in your role, kind of with the whole deferred prosecution agreements, and when you got involved with building cases and you had somebody, why go to the integrity monitor role as opposed to straight out debarment or other measures?
So a couple of things, but I just wanted to add something to what Leah had said about kind of getting different people independent from a company to come in and give a different perspective to make sure companies are staying on top of their compliance program and seeing it from a different perspective. Not that long ago, I was hired to work with a private company, and so to Jack's point, I went to work for the company because I liked the company. I thought they were a good company, and I thought they're trying to do the right thing, but they just wanted to kind of get refreshed on what's the reality, especially surrounding their interaction with government entities. And I went in and I spoke to a group, and they were talking about how they interact with government employees and what can they do and can they take people to lunch and things like that. And what I learned real quick from this company was that they were good people who were just kind of clueless about government rules and regulations that surround what they do. They were very heavily focused on private work, and they had a big chunk, but not, wasn't half their business was on government. And I remember going into that lecture, they started raising questions to me about what can they and what can't they do, and I was basically telling them, don't take anything, and I explained to them the concept of why you shouldn't. It caused such chaos in this meeting. People were shocked by it, and it was like people were yelling and screaming. I got calls from the general counsel, like, what did you tell our people, and once everyone calmed down and we started to go through it, and even the general counsel, I said, these folks are taking people, out to lunches, and they may or may not be doing anything wrong, but have you ever broken down specifically what they can do in that jurisdiction? And when I started to go through it with the general counsel, yeah, you could take out a government employee in California, but it was like $50 a year. So what's the point of even doing it? And how are you not going to cross over that $50 threshold? It's almost impossible. So my first lecture was chaos. By the end, when I started speaking to folks, they were like, yeah, why are we even doing it at all? There's so many regulations around it, it's not worth, the headache of what could potentially come our way. So I just wanted to share that story. I mean, as far as, why go down the road of integrity monitorship, I think, instead of debarment, it's a fine line, right? It's really about assessing that company and, is it a problematic company, through and through, or is it, one or two people that went off the rails that really, are the bad actors, and that company is, worth rehabilitating because generally they're good people and good owners, and they are trying to do the right thing. But it's figuring that out, and that's tough. I mean, sometimes, as with big companies, it doesn't really matter. They're going to stay on board because they're so big and so entrenched in jobs that you're forced to put a monitorship on them. But, there are a lot of companies that get jammed up that are good companies, and they're good people, and, the monitorship is a good way of, getting them back on the right track. And even with that, I've seen it over the years. Initially, those companies are resistant, but when they get through those first few months and they realize the benefit of a monitor, like I always say to companies, I'm like, look, when you have those hesitation moments and you're wondering, is this the right thing to do? When you have a monitor there, you just took it off your plate. You just turn to the monitor, you get that level of comfort, and you move forward. And I feel when those jobs get going after 6 months or 18 months, they like the monitorship. They like the fact that someone's there that they can rely on, can take those integrity decisions off their plate, get an opinion from an expert who does it every day, and they can continue doing the business that they do. So, I feel like it brings a real level of comfort after that initial, resistance level.
Great, thanks. Judge, in your role in the judiciary, why the integrity monitor assignment as opposed to debarment or some of the other, or prosecuting further?
Well, if you think about it, and I'm going to steal from Leah's world right now and bring you back to first year of law school for some of you. If you think about what sentencing is, there's 5 reasons for sentencing, right? There's retribution, there's incapacitation, which is, in essence, debarment, taking the person out of the situation so they can do no further harm. There's deterrence, which is general and specific, right? The deterrence message is so the world, that particular world of people, see the lesson that was learned. And specific deterrence, which is that particular individual or company, is shown taught a lesson, for lack of a better word. Restoration, which is making the victim of the bad thing whole. And the final one is rehabilitation. And that, I think, is the essence of what a monitor is and should do. It's rehabilitation, because we have all seen the range of the cause of a monitor being assigned. And it can be from a good company doing something naively against the regulations because they, quite frankly, just did not know, to outright fraud. And once you get inside within a company and see what their culture is, and you start to develop it, your role and goal is to be rehabilitative in their process, in their culture, as it was brought out by my colleagues up here. And I think for a monitor to really be true to themselves, to the role that you're taking, then what you have to do is bring that entity to a certain point, and then hopefully there's a pass-off where you can tell the agency or the owner, my job is done here. They have a clean bill of health. They have learned. But as I said, because we've all seen a range of transgressions there, I mean, if you think about it, I think we can count on one or two hands. If you went up to a general contractor how many years ago and said, who's your compliance guy? Huh? They wouldn't know what you were doing. And what's the most common word or sentence spoken by someone when you first get in there? Well, that's the way we've always done it, right? How many times have you heard that? And as pointed out, it's changing and rehabilitating that culture, and that's the benefits of it, is showing them the path to get to where they should be.
Thanks. Steve, follow-up thoughts on that? You know, that's the way we've always done it. You've kind of changed, you've broken that mold a little bit. The projects you have are so large and have been such a high profile. How have you seen the acceptance kind of the charge that you've mandated?
I think it's changed the culture. I mean, from what I can, well, definitely at the port, because now it's, you know, me too, in the sense of the next project, and it's just automatic. I went to Bayonne, we had it there, and it was seamless, because we actually look for your IG and ask him for guidance on issues. The projects that we're looking at now are mega projects and really need that attention. So I think it's pretty well cultural now. I think even private is beginning to look at it. I won't say it's wholly accepted on the private side, but definitely on the public side. But even private is seeing the benefit of it, and I think as time goes on, it'll be pretty much a standard thing like safety. I mean, you know, safety, I mean, let's go back, you know, again, I use as a young boy, going to a lot of funerals of construction workers. And now you look at safety and how we analyze it, extremely focused analysis, and we've accomplished it. It's now become part of second nature to people. And I think the IG is right there relative to that. And I think I just think it's there. I think it's there, and I think it's accepted, and it'll continue to grow, and people see the benefits, and it'll become second nature.
Thanks. Ron, is both your role as an IG and now in your role listening to IGs from across the country, you know, I hear all the time, when we attend your conferences, we hear the IGs, well, if you don't want to have any friends, you know, if you want to have a friend as an IG, buy a dog, you know. It's how do you get through that now and say, you know what, we're serving a good role, and we can work cooperatively and, you know, and cohesively with these agencies to get these projects built transparently and ethically and under the right circumstances.
Well, I think you mentioned it before, Jack, in that the concept of Inspector General for a project is being carried forward out of the New York, New Jersey area. And Chicago has embraced it for their airport project. Miami has used Project Inspectors General. So I think that the concept of Inspector General of integrity monitors used by Inspectors General is gaining support. I think that it's being viewed as a beneficial use of dollars, right? But I think, you know, I want to address, first of all, the concept of Inspector General. I think that, you know, perhaps 10 years ago, even, you would rarely hear the term Inspector General on the nightly news. I think now it's more commonplace, and especially when you're talking about the work Michael Horowitz has done as DOJ Inspector General. But it seems more frequent that you put on the nightly news, and if there's an incident, they're talking about an Inspector General report, or if there's an audit being done, an Inspector General audit. So I think the concept of having Inspectors General, and they continue to pop up in various jurisdictions. This past election day, there are at least 3 or 4 jurisdictions around the country that had referendums on the ballots to have an Inspector General. So I think the concept of an Inspector General is growing, and I think the use of integrity monitor is growing. And, you know, with an integrity monitor, there's a cost to it. And Steve mentioned the cost as far as the World Trade Center project. You know what those dollars are. What you can't measure is how much fraud you actually prevent. Right? So the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners does a yearly study, the global study of how much fraud there is in the industry, and whether the construction industry is 5% fraud or 7% fraud. If your cost of an integrity monitor is 1% or less, and you're able to save somewhere under that 5 or 7% of fraud that's going to occur, you're ahead of the game. And that's the value of having integrity monitors on these projects. And the deterrent effect of people seeing that if you're out there and you're going to get caught, you don't want that happening to you. You're going to think twice about engaging in that bad behavior.
Thanks. Steve mentioned the acceptance into the private sector. Mike, maybe we can kick to you. Are you seeing, when you meet with the private owner, when you meet with companies in the private sector, are you getting any acceptance to the idea of, you know what, we can help you? Not integrity, because we don't want to impede your integrity. Let's be a compliance monitor. Let's work with you to make sure that you're understanding. You mentioned your own internal challenges, but when you meet with outside owners that are building large projects or have other compliance challenges, what's been the acceptance out there? And what's the biggest challenge you have to face in breaking through that resistance?
I think that the concept is starting to catch on. I think you get the same resistance that you received from government 20 years ago, where everyone tells you about the layers they have in place already, and that they're already on top of it. So that same resistance is there. I think that it is changing. I recently received a phone call from a construction company that was looking to do a big job locally. And he said, look, we'd like to submit on the job with you guys as part of our team. We want to go into that job saying, we have an integrity monitor with us, and we're ahead of the game, which is something we've really been working towards. This is the wrong company, though. When he said it, I'm like, that would be great, just not with you guys. But I do think it's catching on, but it's the exact same resistance. And, with private, even more so than government, it's about the bottom dollar, and the private companies are thinking, is it going to cut into our money? And, we have people that we're paying. We're paying a CM, a PM, we have all these layers in place, an owner's rep, and, it's the same concept that, I preach to them because I believe it, that, yes, you have all those folks in place. But at the end of the day, they're part of the construction team. They're part of the team that's trying to get the job done. And they're not necessarily going to raise their hand when there's an issue, because they may be part of the issue. And then secondly, when there is an issue that comes up, you don't necessarily want that team being diverted to start concentrating on, integrity matters that are coming up. It's nice to have an independent arm that can go in, address those issues. Construction keeps constructing. The integrity monitors deal with the issue, and simultaneously you're dealing with the issue at hand. You're coming up with policy recommendations, but the construction team keeps going. And then you start inserting recommendations to them and start making corrective action. But, you don't slow down the job and you keep it moving. So the resistance to me is very similar as it was many years ago with government, that I think has eroded away, but you get that same type of pushback from a private company that you did from government many years ago.
Thanks. Judge, your bio says that you do some education and training in this area, an expert in best practices for integrity and So how do you see this interaction? How do you sell the private sector or other agencies that have not yet embraced this on this model?
I think in a broad sense, you can almost look at anything in life like that. People are at times resistant to change. So they kind of look at you with a side eye when you start to bring it in because it's not something they're used to. But I think it reaches out to all different aspects of in the workforce. I mean, you look at, like Mike's a former police officer. You ask an average policeman, hey, do you know anybody in internal affairs? They give you this side look, yeah, kind of. They don't want to admit it, but it's needed, it's necessary, and it's protective of you, which you try to explain to the private companies. I've noticed, as Mike just mentioned, there is the initial reaction I've gotten often is the cost. But as also pointed out by Mr. Calvosa, is when you start to explain the percentages of the benefits that they will gain from it, then it's kind of like an eye-opening for them. Once you start to walk them through it, it's almost like you hold their hand and say, all right, listen, things are changing. You got to change with them, and it's good for you. Okay? And then they start to, oh, okay. It's like any kind of change. If you walk them through it, then I've started to see the acceptance. Literally recently, within the last couple of weeks, there was a company that I've done work with, and they were steadfast against it. And it was a matter of principle and part and cost. But then when you lay it out for them as to what benefits that they would incur from it in the broader stroke, well, then they actually embraced it.
Thanks. I was listening to talk radio yesterday in the sports. They had the coach from Syracuse and asked me, dealing with these young players. He said, well, I love dealing with millennials. He said, they need structure. They just have never learned it yet. He said, my job is to teach them that they really want structure, that they really want discipline. And then once they get that, then they're the kind of athletes that I want to coach. And so I love that. It's kind of a great analogy from the sports world into what we do on a day-to-day basis. Leah, with the private, your company's had issues in the past, and they've done a lot, and they've made a real change. How are you seeing that acceptance, and how does your company sell that to the private owners that you go to work for as to being part of your cultural change and why it's good for their companies to work with a structured tone now in your new structure and your new fashion?
Sure. And I mean, we still get questions from clients, new clients and existing clients about, well, should we be concerned, and what have you done to sort of ensure that, no other, misconduct will occur in the future. And it's the same kind of question we would pose to a sub that has a regulatory issue as well. What have you done since then? And that's really, you can talk about, well, we don't really get into the underlying conduct. It's what have we done since then? And we've done a lot. And so one is, in terms of governance, right? Having independent directors, having our compliance department report directly to the chair of our audit, finance, and risk committee. Things like revised policies. And a lot of companies will have a code of conduct, and you'll have your standard boilerplate policies, but really fine-tuning those and making sure they're consistent with your culture. You don't want to, shove like a 35-page code of conduct in front of a bunch of guys who do construction. They're just going to say, like, this is just written by a lawyer. It's not written for us. And you also want to have training and communication, not just training once a year where, someone's just very passively taking the training, but also having awareness campaigns. So things that are actually going on. So right, for last year, for Structure Tone, we focused on conflicts of interest because I do think they're a very tricky area. They're hard to identify. And most people think, well, I have a conflict. I can manage it myself. I don't need to tell anyone. And so really pushing employees to disclose any situation they have where they think there could be a conflict. Other things that we've done are construction management guidelines. So we drafted, in consultation with all of our business unit leaders, rules to govern the way a project is run. And we invested over $10 million in software to track expenditures, making sure that everything is billed and that money is properly spent. And we have 26 control points to make sure that the system is working. And we did live training on that system for over 2 years. And that's a roadshow to all 31 of our offices to make sure every employee knows how to use this software. And the other thing we have is internal controls, right? And that part of that is third-party risk management, and it's a very robust program. And one thing we're doing is continuously monitoring our subs so that every single night we have a background check that's run, and every time there's a hit, it's reviewed by a lawyer. And so there's a very well-defined escalation process. And if there is a hit on a subcontract that we work with, then it's literally bringing them in and sitting down with them and saying, okay, well, tell me about this situation and what have you done since then? And that's the most important part, right? And a lot of the times the sub will say, well, we engaged someone and they don't want to call it a monitor, and we're like, you can call it whatever you want, compliance consultant, whatever you want to call it, but did you stick with that? You know, did you have someone in place for a year, and then after a year you got rid of your hotline, you got rid of your compliance officer, and you stopped training employees? You really have to keep the good work of a monitorship going, right? So it's not just at one point in time we were really compliant, and then it sort of fell to pieces after that. So making sure that you continue the good work. And so at Structure Tone, it's the same thing, right? It wasn't just after 2014 we were going to have, you know, these great programs in place, but it's continuing that work and always assessing ourselves to make sure where we stand and that we're doing the best that we can. And part of that is asking employees, how do you feel about coming to work? Do you feel that you can trust your supervisor? Do you feel that if you had a concern, it would be taken seriously and that you would be dealt with fairly? So constantly taking your temperature and making sure that you're improving.
Thanks. You know, we're touching base mostly here because of the panel we put together and my personal experience in the construction industry, but certainly we've seen integrity monitors in the automotive industry, in pharmaceuticals, in finance and banking. So it extends across the board. There's no shortage of corruption. There's no shortage of bad people trying to game the system. So as I said, we're kind of focused here on the construction, but there's certainly plenty of other areas where we've seen the effective use of integrity monitors, and there is a role. Pretty much whenever there's federal dollars in this funding, there are compliance challenges. Steve, what is it, though, about construction in your role that kind of keeps bringing these highlights in? You know, the Joint Task Force, the Construction Fraud Task Force, had this great idea, and you've talked several times now about the safety. It's about the safety of the workers. It's about the integrity of the program, but yet the title was the fraud, Construction Fraud Task Force. So what is it with the construction world we see that keeps highlighting these issues and kind of putting that bad taint on what are a lot of good, hardworking men and women?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I think what happens is construction is not like figure skating, if I could say that. You know, a bank is a nice clean wall and all that, but I know people are in banking that now they've embraced it, and they say, you know, my son's in banking, they force you to take 2 weeks off, they look for irregularities, you know, they fix it, they move on. In construction, it kind of dates back to the, you know, decades ago when it was kind of like, you know, people paying people off, and, you know, there's those movies you see all the time. But I think the positive about it is that we accepted that, you know, we came out in front and said, yes, there is a problem, just like there isn't anything else. Like you said, you know, follow the money. Wherever there's money, I hate to say it, but there will be an opportunity for corruption. So you got to follow the money. So is construction on a relative scale worse than anybody else? No, I think it's better. I think it's better because we're out in front of it. I mean, you know, we were down at the end. In fact, Ron and I would, you know, got to the point we were squeezing so hard on things. Like if someone submitted a bad bill, we called them in and I would say bad. Honestly, it probably was just sloppy, okay? Or maybe that's the way they've done it forever, you know, back to the comments that have been made, that they couldn't bill for something. Or so we really have now taken that I don't want to call it corruption, but that lack of quality and raise the bar. So I think we're actually in front. I don't look at it as construction being behind and everybody else being pure. I think we're in front setting, listen, we know we got a problem, we know there's a problem, and I think Ron said it best. You know, we have tons of safety people, okay, and they got to be diligent, but we should also have an IM now, an Inspector General Integrity Monitor, to watch over things, because wherever there's a lot of money, there's opportunities for people to do things they shouldn't be doing. Is it the majority? No, it is not the majority. And the other thing I want to say is people keep saying I have a PM and a CM. Anybody knows a PM, CM, yeah, okay, they're not looking they're not looking at the question of integrity, but that's not their primary function. Their primary function is move the job. Get the bills through, get paid, make the bosses happy, make the clients happy. It's not about looking for, now, not for looking for corruption. Even it was a side job for me, but I've said to my staff, I set the tone, I said, I'm not doing anything. I mean, I've had people come to me and say, listen, I'm about to throw these tickets in the garbage. You can take them if you want. It was not, I think the person was being sincere. I really don't think they were trying to, they said, it's our corporation, they're our box. If you want them, you can have them. I said, release them and drop them in the garbage, which he did. Now, the old days, you probably took them and went to the game. But you know what? No more. No more. I never did, never will, just don't want any part of it. And I impose that on my staff. And I have found, some of my staff, with the IG's help, did cross the line. And we did what we had to do to correct it. So the simple answer to your question, I think construction's ahead of everyone else. And I think that the other ones, the other thing, we're public agencies. So when we have something and we catch something, we tell people. I mean, look, it's, when the IG finds something, what do you see announced by the Port Authority? We found corruption, we investigated it, we dealt with it, and it's solved. And I'm not making a general statement, but generally speaking, private industry deals with it, and it just is not publicized like we do. We have a fiduciary responsibility. We're spending every one of your dollars. I actually used to joke, I used to be a mayor of a town, and during that mayorship, I used to joke about it, but I meant it. I watch my money very closely, but I watch the people's money even closer. Because it's not my money, it's your money. And that's the way you got to remember each and every day. And I think we're doing a good job. Can we do better? Yes, but we're learning every day.
Thanks. Ron, you want to follow up on that?
Well, I think a couple of points I'd like to follow up on. Steve mentioned it, and I think tone at the top is very important. Whether you're dealing with a public agency or a private construction company, the tone at the top is important. And that's the tone that Steve set at the Port Authority on these projects, saying, number one, corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse will not be tolerated. Number two, telling the staff that you have to cooperate with the inspector general, you have to cooperate with the integrity monitors, telling that to the contractors as well, getting that message across and saying it will not be tolerated. That's really important. The other thing I'd like to mention, usually when I give these presentations, since the focus was so much on fraud prevention, that, I like to address that and say that that was our primary focus. But we were not 100% successful in fraud prevention, and I don't think any effort like this could ever be. So what I want to address now is the type of cases that we made through the integrity monitors' work, their observations. There were several different types of cases made, from prevailing wage fraud to minority women-owned business fraud, labor racketeering, ghost employees, false billing. There were even people selling false OSHA safety cards because people were not interested in taking the 10-hour course. There were all different types of successful investigations. There continue to be successful prosecutions with the Construction Fraud Task Force out of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And these were the result of hard work done by the integrity monitors. And, going back to the statements before, historically, the construction industry in New York was tainted by organized crime influence. It was ingrained in the project, just the same way that poor safety practices were followed. Corruption, the way of doing business, was to offer bribes, to have no-show employees, to cut corners, to falsely bill, and this was ingrained. So that was the culture, and we talked before about a cultural change, and that's what was necessary, and that's what was important. The success of the integrity monitors' work, going back to the cleanup operation at the World Trade Center site, was measured. How do you measure it? Well, one of the local prosecutors had a wiretap going on an organized crime family. And they actually intercepted a conversation where one member of organized crime said to another, hey, we have to get down to the World Trade Center site. There's a lot of money to be made down there. We got to get down there. And the other person on the other end of the phone said, no, not going down there. They have this thing called integrity monitors. They're all over the place. I'm staying far away from that. And that was reported to us at DOI. And that was the measure that, hey, we're known, we're doing a good job, and the bad guys are staying away. And again, going back to my point, we weren't 100% successful in preventing fraud. I don't think any operation could ever be 100%. But where there was fraud, we were able to detect it, investigate it, keep it off that front page, Jack, that you mentioned before. How did we prevent scandal? There was no scandal. Anything that involved wrongdoing was observed, caught, addressed, or nipped in the bud in that fraud prevention mode. Hey, this is going on. You can't do this here. And nip it before it becomes or leads to criminal activity. That's the success of the program that we had in place at the Port Authority.
Thanks. Mike?
Yeah. Just to add to Ron's point about it being known, it's a similar message that I've tried to get out to some private companies. Because like we said earlier, the concept is definitely picking up with private companies having compliance programs in place. And again, I've only been out for less than a year, but I've seen it in a couple of matters I've been involved in where even in the private sector, they know, right? They gauge the client that they work for. And, if you're a private company that does a lot of construction and you decide that you're not going to have, that type of compliance program or some integrity presence, they know that. And those are the clients that, that they're going to attempt to steal from. And I've seen it where, companies just for way too long have just been too reliant on their people, and they haven't taken those measures. Recently we had a contractor in, I was working for a private company, and we brought the CM in, and, we were explaining the new integrity rules that would be put in place, including a new program management tool to kind of manage the project, the paperwork, the invoicing, and, he turned around and said, look, I can deliver to you the same thing just with my people. I have good people in place, and we don't really need those measures. And it's exactly, when he said, I'm like, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're the prime example of someone that fraud is going to run wild through your company because, you trust your program manager that's been with you for 20 years or 15 years. And that's okay to trust them, but you have to constantly test and verify. And by bringing in monitors or some sort of compliance program, that's how you do it. And, it's a message that we're trying to send out to more private companies.
Thanks. Judge, comments on that? Why construction? What's in construction?
Well, I don't think you can hide behind it. As pointed out, historically, it's been a land of opportunity for fraud and organized crime. And I wholeheartedly agree with what Mr. Plate said. The construction industry has, the old saying, recognizing it as the first step. Well, that's what the construction industry is doing here right now. And over the past 10 years or 15 years or more, it started, as pointed out, maybe 17 years ago, as kind of the launching pad. But where there is opportunity, where there is money, where are you going to find bad guys? And I think that conversation, I've heard that story before, I think that should be framed and, and hung in an office somewhere, because that shows where this is going, because they're going to then scurry off to some other opportunity, and what you're doing and what the people in this room are doing is getting in front of it.
Thanks. Leah, from the contractor's angle.
Sure. I think, you're talking about trying to change longstanding practices, and I'll give you an example of gifts and entertainment, right? So, yeah, people are used to getting lavish gifts, going out to lavish meals. On the other hand, you don't want to discourage people from engaging in, hospitality at all. I don't think it's realistic to move towards zero tolerance in this industry. And if you talk to our business development folks, they're like, well, we can't take people out. I'm like, well, you can. It's got to be reasonable, and that's getting people's mind around what's reasonable today, right? You can't fly people somewhere, but you can you can go to a game occasionally. You can do that kind of thing. But it's just, instilling what's reasonable today. And even if, our competitors are doing something else, I'm like, okay, well, that's fine, but that's illegal, so we're not going to do that. So just, sort of instilling new norms, I think, is what's important.
Thanks. I want to change the topic a little bit here, but I think this is an area. 5 years ago, I went to my first public-private partnership conference, P3s. And, I got in this room, over 800 people talking about public-private partnerships. At the time, had not really taken any traction here in the United States, had not really gotten off the ground. But as I sat and I listened to it, states, counties, municipal, federal government doesn't have any money. We've heard about it. We don't want to pay the taxes anymore. We hear all the challenges. And it sounded to me like this was a solution. Now, it's not that you don't pay for it in a P3 model. You just pay for it over 30 years, over 50 years. But you don't have to come out today out of your capital project dollars. And so you get a chance to kind of amortize it. And in this fashion, the public-private partnership, they're going to design, procure, finance, build, and then operate. We've had the challenge in the industry because they've tried to get away from providing surety bonds because we don't need it because we're taking on all that risk. And fortunately, there's been some owners that have pushed back and say, no, we're in this risk with you forever because we have the reputational risk. And then push back, too, on some of the integrity and oversight. Ron, I know you guys have been up front, the Port Authority, Steve, with the LaGuardia Airport, the largest public-private partnership undergoing in the United States right now, and you, from the beginning, established a role of integrity monitors on that job. What was the thinking? How did you get the concessionaires? What was the pushback from them? And what do you see as the ultimate success of it right now?
Well, it certainly is a different animal when you talk about a method of construction and procuring construction. And I think that the biggest challenge that we faced with the fraud prevention program is that the agency itself decided to do this public-private partnership, and in doing so, shifted some of the risk of contracting over to the construction management firm, right? The private firm doing the work. So they shift the risk over to them, and the risk, as far as we're concerned from a corruption standpoint, is, hey, the controls on fraud, waste, and abuse still have to be in place, all right? Contractor may view it as, why are you looking over my shoulder? That's my dollar. It's not the public dollar. But the reality is, it is the public dollar, because eventually, whether it's 30 years later or however the project agreement is structured, ultimately, there's a public dollar involved. Second is that if anything goes on, and we talked about preventing scandal, if something should happen at LaGuardia Airport, do you think it's going to be that the construction management firm's name is going to be in the paper? It's going to be Port Authority project at LaGuardia Airport, revealed, blah, blah, blah. So I think that the challenge that we had, more so than on any traditional, CM design build project, when you're dealing with a P3 structure, is the dealing with the private company doing the work and saying to them, hey, we're here for a purpose. You might think it's your dollar, you might think it's your risk, but there cannot be fraud, waste, and abuse on this project, and we're going to put the necessary controls in place. We're going to be out here watching, we're going to be out here auditing the books, and you're going to have to live with us. And that was kind of, a little bit of shock, because this model of P3 was, hey, we have the risk now, we're just moving ahead the way we want to move ahead, and we have a mandate to do it. So our role is to say, hey, we're out there watching.
Steve, what was you were, I'm sure, in some of those construction meetings early on with the concessionaires, with the teams that were being put together, and how did they take to this concept that they were going to be held to an integrity monitor on the project?
Well, I could use World Trade. I think everybody on this dais has categorized it well. kind of the joke is, I'm the IRS and I'm here to help you. So you got that look. That was a joke. It was pretty dry. You have to laugh. I'm not. But so what happened was, at some point we had to convince him, and I think Ron alluded to it properly. If I'm monitoring you, it's a lot easier to have a one-on-one conversation. If I'm monitoring you through Ron and everybody on this dais, by the time it gets to you, there's a lot of communication issues. There's also, if everybody at this dais doesn't buy into it, it's like, yeah, just give him a piece of paper. Give him a pink piece. We used to joke, give him a pink piece of paper. He wants it pink. Put it on pink paper versus yellow paper. Just kind of, get it done. So I think it adds another level of complexity. It also goes back to getting people to buy in. I think to challenge the industry, listen, I don't care if you're private or public anymore. The old days was, okay, if there's a problem in a private company, they do what they had to do and make it go away. I mean, that was a sense, I think we all knew that 10, 20, 30 years ago. That's not the case anymore. Therefore, it's transparent. What happens in government happens in a few years, maybe a decade in private. They have to follow the same rules eventually because people expect that, because we continue to raise the bar. So I think what the industry has to do is show that, reputation is very important. I mean, look at some of these companies that are struggling right now. Their price per share is taking a beating. That's real money, and the stock, everybody eyes open up, including the board of directors. But we also have to do, we always said you save money. We have to do some metrics. I use the word metrics. It's basically math. I always talk in math because we could talk words, but everybody has a little variation on what the words mean. Metrics is math. So how much money have you saved, and how could you quantify that? Just to throw it out there, let's say we hadn't done what we did, and, organized crime got into world trade. So what would happen is you'd have 2 or 3 bidders. Prices would have jumped 50%. I'm making up a number, but dramatically higher. And you would have paid, the public would have paid for that, and the quality would have dropped, because then it just permeates. It becomes, use the word cancer. It infiltrates the entire body and destroys the body. So, from the guy who's inspecting the concrete. I mean, here's an example. Some of you aren't, probably most of you aren't civil engineers. The concrete in Tower 1 was designed to be 14,000 pounds per square inch. Sidewalk is 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per square inch. We were breaking cylinders because of the quality control that we had at 21,000. So think about it. Now, if you go the other way, and hypothetically, and probably years ago it was like that, it's supposed to be 14, but it's 10. Who's ever going to know? It'll be fine. You're paying for a product, and you got to get the product, okay? And it becomes insidious. It starts with, maybe a little bit of higher prices, and then all of a sudden this guy's paying this guy, and this guy's paying that guy, and it just permeates throughout the system. So you got to almost do a case study and start to track these projects and saying, if you hit a fork in the road, you go with an IM, you pay this much. Okay, you had to pay an extra $1 million or $2 million. I mean, these smaller jobs, it's maybe $3 to $5 million. And I say smaller, $1 billion jobs. If you go the other way, are you going to pay that 3 to 5? I think you're going to pay a lot more. But you got to start showing people that. And I think it's evolving there. But you got to get in front of that story. Not just trust me, I'm here to help you, but here's how when I'm an engineer, so, to sell a job is almost like considered not the highest calling, but, you have to sell yourself every day that you can do the job. And so it's not just about doing it, it's also about convincing people that you can do it and showing them that you can do it. So I think this industry needs to do more of that. I mean, because the first reaction is always going to be, don't worry, we got it.
I don't know, does the structure tone play in the P3 space, and would you see the role of an integrity monitor being a difference maker for you as a part of that concessionaire team to sell to an owner and say, you know what, this is the difference between our team and some of the others. We think, take it to this level.
Well, we're not in that space, but I will follow up on a point that Steve made, which is, how the industry is changing. And, we see it changing when clients ask for the compliance people to be at the table with the project team. And that was unheard of years ago, right? And now it's, you're at the pitch meetings and you have to explain, here are our policies, here's how we vet our subs. And that's fairly new. And so that really helps us make the business case because clients want to see us.
Great, thanks. Mike, any thoughts on your discussions with private owners? Any acceptance of this or seeing the role as being a sales pitch for them?
Just to add to what Leah said, as far as, I think there is acceptance to it, but as far as the what's expected and, we frequently do vetting of all sorts of different companies for private entities. And, we have the same question every time we find an issue with the company, big, small, or in the middle. The first question we have when we're trying to evaluate for our private client whether to engage other private entities, all right, we see you had a problem in 2004, we see you had a problem in 2010, or you have a bad safety record. Who are your compliance people? What are your programs in place? And we'd like to meet them. So companies that don't have that, when we ask that question for the client we're working for, we cut them off. That's a company to us that's not taking, things seriously and haven't kind of adapted to the changing ways. So, it is something that is at the forefront of our thinking, and I think it's important.
Great, thanks. You know what, we've got a half an hour left, but I've got a few more questions. But I'd rather, this group usually isn't a shy one, so let's throw it out to kind of the groups of questions for the panelists here. And we'd love to take some questions and get some dialogue back and forth. Yes?
So I'm not...
Want to stand up so that everybody can hear? Thank you.
I'm not in your space, so I hope this question doesn't end up being too elementary to the crowd. But this is for you, Ron. Can you give 2 or 3 examples of where on the World Trade Center's project you detected fraud so that you initiated an investigation? In other words, I'm curious about what are the mechanisms that bring something to your attention so that you start an investigation. Is it whistleblowers? Is it some sort of data analysis? Is it, what is it? How does something, 2 or 3 examples of how something jumps out at you and you say, we need to investigate this?
It's actually a very good question. And it's interesting because we do in the IG role, which, I left just 6 months ago, but in the IG world, you rely on whistleblowers. You rely on people bringing complaints to you, right? So part of our overall fraud prevention program included having a hotline down at the Trade Center. But the hotline was rarely used. And that was a good thing, because part of the integrity monitoring program was having on-site investigators. So on each of the project, there were investigators on the job site, and these, I mentioned before, retired NYPD detectives, retired federal agents, who had a natural ability to have people talk to them. So, our hotline wasn't ringing off the hook, but our on-site integrity monitor investigators was getting information. So people would come to them and say, this is not right, or they would see things that weren't quite right. That was one way. Another way of getting it was through the auditors. The auditors were not just regular auditors, they were forensic auditors. So they were doing deep dives, looking for problems in the books and records of a company and pointing out irregularities. So, in talking about, you asked for a couple of examples. I mean, I could give you the types of investigations, and I mentioned that before. Prevailing wage fraud. So looking at books and records, finding that, hey, the books and records look okay, but having our investigators speak to workers and say, how much money are you actually making on the job, right? And finding out there was a discrepancy. That could lead to an investigation. As far as minority and women-owned business fraud, that was through observations of who was actually working on the project and talking to workers and finding out, well, who is actually your boss, who do you actually report to, and then looking at books and records. That type of investigation resulted on that. And then, playing off of something that Steve Plate mentioned as far as concrete, one of a very successful prosecution conducted by the Port Authority Inspector General's Office, DOI, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office involved the concrete testing companies. And one of the projects was down at One World Trade Center, and Steve mentioned doing these testing, and a combination of integrity monitor engineer detecting that these test results can't be the same every time, and working with Port Authority engineers, coming up with the initiation of a case which grew exponentially, that this was a systemic problem with certain testing companies that were falsifying test results. These are the type of things that, were detected. And I mentioned before, false OSHA cards. The workers, it was a requirement to improve safety at the World Trade Center site that every single worker had to complete a 10-hour OSHA course and have the card with them. And, workers were too lazy or didn't want to spend 10 hours taking the course. There were people selling them. So were these people properly trained? Did they understand, some basic safety concepts? No, they just were going to continue business as usual and have the card. And those people were detected, and prosecutions resulted of that.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? Sure. It helped that we had 1,000 cameras also on the site. We used to, whenever there was an issue, we could actually track it and do forensics on it, and that helped Ron and helped my people. In fact, you could observe 24/7 what's going on. So they were real-time at the site.
Yeah.
And that concrete one is, I had forgotten. I forget a lot after a while. But that was, we inherited the project. I won't get into too much detail. We inherited the project from a private developer. The footings were placed, and we started to come up low on the concrete. It was supposed to be 12,000 PSI, and they were coming up a little low. But they were consistently, everything was identical. We said, as engineers, we just never saw that before. So we flipped it to the IG, and we found that was fine structurally. It was more of an issue of the inspector feeling, I don't know, for whatever reason, he felt maybe he gets positive feedback from the owners or the developers, and he was not just on this job, but there was a host of different jobs that he was doing this. So that's, you see how that's iterative? Our engineer, I mean, with all due respect, Ron and I became pseudo-experts of each one of our fields, but at the end of the day, Ron looks to my structural engineer to feed information to him, and he jumps all over it with the IM, and they were able to sort through those things. So it was really important. I mean, Ron would call us and say, can we get on the cameras, this camera, there was something happened here, we get the cameras, hand them the tapes, and he'd go from there. So a lot of hand and glove type of relationship.
And it's basic. We had one, we were looking at one of the subcontractors, and one of my people came to me, 80% of the men's payroll checks were being cashed at the Wonder Bar. So we sent an investigator out, sat at the Wonder Bar on a Thursday afternoon, and it was pretty interesting what he got to see by way of the men going and cashing their checks and then paying respects before they had to leave. And so it was like, now turn it over, go ahead and here's what we found, here's what we discovered, turn it over to the Inspector General's office and let them go ahead and do their work. But those are the kind of things, by working with field observations to forensic accounting to then going back out. So really every day was something new. Yeah, we had a question right up here in the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for the very interesting explanation and views. I have 4 quick questions. I hope the answers can be short as well.
Yes, no.
First one, who controls the monitors? Second question, how much it increasing cost as an average? I think Mr. Calvosa said something about 1% as an average in the cost of each project. The third question, how much it was as an average saved in corruption costs, in waste, if you have this percentage? And what drives the decision of make or buy? I mean, increase the size of the Inspector General's office, say with its own people, or hire third party contractors? Or you make yourself or you buy third party work? Thank you.
1 minute. I think the board is the first answer. You want one-word answers. The Board of Commissioners, they report directly to the Board of Commissioners. They bypass me and I get fed back officially. Okay? 1% is the right number. I forgot the third one you have. And
How much percentage was saved?
What's the savings? Have you seen the savings as a result?
that's the part I'd have to sit down and do a calculation. I don't know, Ron, if you've ever done anything on that.
Certain number is measurable, because if you find a false billing, you could measure how much was the false part of it. If you have any other type of fraud, you could actually measure that. But a lot of it you can't measure, which is the prevention part of it. How much fraud, waste, and abuse was deterred.
Yeah, but if you get the World Trade Center, for instance, how much it was saved? Because you say tens of millions. So how much it was? 10 million, 100 million?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So a couple of things to address a few of your questions. So one, as far as who monitors the monitors, I think you asked. So, like I said, at least at DOI, and I know the port is the same way. We spend a considerable amount of time when I was there. We built up a unit that was their job to monitor the monitors. A big part of our job when I was there and I oversaw that unit was monitoring the bills, right? Because everyone's concerned about it. Whoever's paying those bills, they want to make sure that they're getting what they're spending. So we spent a considerable amount of time on that, and making sure that what you were getting was actually taking place, and that it was a value that the monitor's activities. As far as putting a price tag on savings for different jobs, it is difficult, but there's a piece you'll never quantify that's extremely valuable, because you deter things before they took place and they decide to go somewhere else and do it, or they decide not to do it. But there are certainly tons of jobs, and Ron can run you through jobs at the port where money's been saved, and so can I at DOI. And I always go back to Hurricane Sandy as to me, which was the prime example of how a monitor ship should work. That I can remember the commissioner at the time was Rose Gilhern, and immediately after Hurricane Sandy hit, we were with the agency sitting down as they were deciding how to construct a plan to build back up these territories that were destroyed. We were literally side by side with them, building up a fraud program at the same time. So it's that early intervention that makes a huge difference. Coming on months after the fact, when rules and regulations or protocols are entrenched and you have to unwind that, can be a real problem. So it's getting involved early. And with Hurricane Sandy, we had a lot of monitors on. We had 5 monitors, and we spent a lot of money on those monitors. But at the end of the day, that was a scenario we could quantify how much money we saved. And you asked a great question before, like how do you get complaints and how do you develop your information? And it's a whole source of information, from your auditors to your hotlines. But in that scenario, it was boots on the ground. We had monitors that were out there, and this is where you distinguish yourself when you discuss what a monitor does as opposed to a traditional auditing company that comes in after the fact. On Hurricane Sandy, our field people were literally in the houses following some of these folks as they were laying, electrical wiring and putting in outlets. And the monitors started to, early on in that process, see that some of the counts were off, that they were inflated. Instead of maybe 500 feet of wiring, we were counting 150. Instead of 10 outlets, we were counting 7. Now, that only took place in a sampling number of houses that we did, but it was pretty consistent. So, we then went out and, blitzed and hit a bunch of houses to see, is this consistent across the project? And what was unique about what we found was, yes, it was rampant. I don't think it was criminal. I think you had, a big project with a lot of money that was infused quickly. You had contractors that were trying to do the right thing. And I think people were running out with spools of wiring of 250 feet. And they're running to the next house. And rather than count how much they laid at that house, they're taking a shortcut saying 250, when maybe it was 150 and 100 went to the next job. But our monitors literally counted that, and I can remember going to the contractors and saying, look, we think your numbers are off. You know, I'm relying on the monitors, and I went with what they said, and the contractor was like, absolutely not. You know, our people are correct. And I remember going out to the field. It got to the point where I'm like, I'm going to go count the wire with you. And I took this owner, and I met him out in the field, and we went to one house, went to 5 houses that day. And I remember walking in, I'm like, oh my God, I hope these monitors are right. And the house was, I think the contractor said 1,250 feet of wiring. So we walked in, and we had an independent counter who was going to walk through it, and me and the owner of the company, and we walked through. And at the end of the day, when the count was done, it was like 300 feet. They were off by like 800. And I could tell by the reaction of the company, they were shocked. Like, this was not a company that was trying to get over. This was a company that lost control of their people in a crazy environment. But at the end of the day, we were able to take those stats and run them across the whole program and extrapolate savings. And we took back so much more, and we spent a lot on the monitors. In that particular job, we got back double. The millions we spent on the monitors, we got double that amount back, literally by counting it. You know, not to mention, you know, what we got back just, you know, by the fact that they were out there. So, you know, it's a combination of different things that weigh in.
One of your other questions was, how do you decide whether to do it with in-house forces or to hire an integrity monitor? It's a good question. And I think the benefit of hiring outside is the expertise that comes with it in the various different disciplines they represent, from the investigative field, auditing, engineering, safety, environmental. They bring together this expertise, and as Mike has mentioned before, you're able with an integrity monitor to say, well, we need this expertise at this time, we need to put more auditors on, we need to put more engineers on, and you know, that's the flexibility that hiring an integrity monitor has, because with your own office staff, you're busy doing the regular work that you have staff to do. And as far as management, at the Port Authority, we manage the integrity monitors. We control everything from the budget, the work plans, and when I say manage, it's really the oversight. It's up to the monitor to develop that work plan, that budget, and then the oversight that we provide is say, no, we don't want you to do that this month. We're going to focus on this. No, you have too many hours for this assignment. We want to cut back and we want to refocus it. So it's really managing it, and it goes from the beginning to the invoicing, everything in between. And as far as dealing with the monitors, we would have, the office would have weekly or bi-weekly calls with the monitors. We'd have monthly meetings with all our monitors at the Trade Center site where we would share different ideas and understand what was going on. And then on a quarterly basis, we would meet with the different project executives. So on a quarterly basis, we would meet with Steve Plata and his team and our integrity monitors in the room at the same time and saying, these are the questions we have, looking for answers. Well, these are the issues we're seeing, and Steve would take, and his staff would take notes. They would address those issues, they would deal with them, they would get back to us with answers on how they were being dealt with, and that was all part of managing an integrity monitor.
Also goes to, in part, what kind of monitor it is. Is it a monitor for a project, or is it a monitor for a company? Because it's a completely different dynamic at that point.
Question in the back. Yes.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the quality of monitors. This is not a new thing since you all brought up the concrete cases. Those happened a decade ago, and that was a great example of monitors doing good stuff. But I think what's notable is that company had a monitor that they had voluntarily obtained in 2002 after they had given gifts on behalf of public employees after 9/11. And so that voluntary monitor, when the investigation started, and I was one of the people leading that investigation, so I'm very aware of this, they used that voluntary IPSIG, if you will, as evidence that they were a good company. And in fact, the IPSIG came into our office and effectively was a defense attorney. And he was full of crap, frankly, and it was a pleasure to frankly, take him down a few pegs. But the truth is that came back years later on other things. There are all different quality of monitors. And I'm wondering both from the check a box monitoring what they're actually doing. And then on the monitor side, I want to know, that doesn't hurt, those of you that are quality, and I know there are people that are quality, that frankly hurts your business when you have the watered down, IPSIGs, if you will, that are doing things on the cheap, and then they're used, and you lose credibility. When they're used, they come to our office and try to use themselves, present themselves as integrity, when in fact it's integrity, on clearance.
Thanks, Diana. She's not talking about us, right, Mike?
No.
Okay. You're welcome.
Can I'd like to answer, give an example of what I hope is a good answer to your question. I'm going to do this with trying not to identify any of the parties. I was at a responsibility hearing with a state agency as the compliance consultant for a particular company. And in the discussions, I had been with that company a number of years. And in the discussions, at the time of the decision, the state agency said, "Thank you, we find you responsible, we want you to have a monitor." And quite frankly, I was like, all right, I thought I was doing a good job with them. The issues that they had came from before I got involved with the company. So I thought my example of what I was doing. The very next week, that state agency assigned me as a monitor for a different company in a wholly different aspect. And looking back on it, I had the realization, what, that state agency felt, whether I believed them at the time or not, I understood it. Like, all right, Holdman's been with them for a little bit. Let's bring someone from the outside in to take a look. And I respected that decision. And having been assigned a monitor the next week, I wasn't as insulted as I was initially. But I hope that's an example. That particular state agency, I thought, was being very transparent in what they wanted to achieve with both the companies and the independence and who they chose.
Ron and Mike, you've gone out through the procurement process and selected monitors. What's the key factor to you to how to get a qualified monitor to identify the integrity of what the work is being done?
So there are a couple of things I'd like to reply to what Diana said. I mean, one, as far as getting a quality monitoring firm, I think that it's a very, very crowded space. I think there are a lot of companies that are pitching in for this. I think that the company name often gets you through the door. It really comes down to the team that gets presented by those companies. It never really mattered to me much, with the company. I always wanted to meet the people and see who was actually running the job. So, you really have to meet those folks and what they sell you and make sure that you get it and that it's not a bait and switch that, they present, an A team to you and then on your job you get a B team. But then I thought you brought up a really good point, as far as, companies that just put a monitor on just to say they have it. And I think that works both ways. I used to say we're government too. When we put a monitor on, I would say, are we giving them enough, hours to go out and be successful on this job? Or are we ourselves as a government just almost covering ourselves by saying we have a monitor on there? But I've experienced it on the private end as well, where companies have reached out because I think they want exactly what you said. They want to say they have a monitor, and they can go to the next government entity or private entity and say, we have, ABC company monitoring us. And, that can't happen. Like, that's upon the monitoring firm to make sure that, when you get hired, you're really getting hired to monitor that company. And if they don't agree to give you the time and effort to get inside their company and assess them from A to Z, that's on the monitoring company that has to step back and say no to that client, and I've only been doing this for a year. I've certainly seen that where, we've had to say no because I know that they're just trying to bring us on just for that, exactly what you described.
Just to follow up on that, I have to say that most of the companies the subcontractors that we work with, where we say, are you willing to engage a monitor, they have no idea who to hire. And that's great for us because we make it a requirement that Structure Tone has to approve any monitor, but then we're able to give them, a pool of names, and then usually it's going to be based on cost, what they can afford. But sometimes we'll have a sub where we'll say, will you work with a monitor, and they'll just give us the name of their contract attorney. And I'm like, well, this is not a monitor. This is just the lawyer that you use who has no experience in auditing or forensics or any of the skills that you would expect a monitor to have. But I would say for the most part, we're able to recommend people, and then usually the sub will take on someone in that pool.
Ron?
Yeah, at the Port Authority, whenever we sought the services of an integrity monitor on one of our projects, we always used an RFP process and made it a competitive process. It didn't matter what the name of the firm was. We wanted to have, as Mike said, the best team for the particular assignment, for the particular project. Who were going to be the team members? Who were the auditors? Who were the boots on the ground people? Who were the engineers? We wanted to get a whole package, and we wanted to select the best package. And the other point you made, Diana, was, I too have been on the other side of the table where I've seen an integrity monitor come in to be an advocate for the company. And I don't believe that that's the role of an integrity monitor. I think an integrity monitor is there. They supplement the IG staff, and just as an IG staff wouldn't be a proponent for a particular company, an integrity monitor should be reporting facts, what they see, what they observe. They could give an opinion of whether a problem still exists or the company's been rehabilitated, but they shouldn't be an advocate saying, this company's a good company, you should give them more work. I think that there's a fine line for integrity monitors, and they need to stay on the right side of that line.
Is that something that runs, since you now run the IT conferences and obviously at the association? We're seeing that more and more. Integrity monitors voluntarily obtained, coming in alongside the defense attorneys, advocating on behalf of the clients. Now, I get it when they're voluntary, they're trying to work out a deal, but personally, I think that it waters down, if they're going to, in the next thing, they're going to be obtained by the agency, I think they're wearing too many hats. It's something that I think at least bears perhaps a topic at your conferences, because I think that the good work, and I have very much been the recipient of much of the good work in many of the cases that we've brought, but I think that there's a danger it's going to get watered down and they're going to lose credibility if they become an extension of the defense team.
Thanks, and that sound that they're blowing for the hounds kind of gives us an idea that we're about to wrap up. We committed to everybody, we get you out here by 11. It's 5 up, and I do want to give each one of our panelists a chance to kind of wrap up and give their own summation. And I'll stick around, and I think some of the other panelists will stick around if you have more questions afterwards. But we do want to honor the time commitments. Go ahead, Steve, start with you.
Just I want to reinforce what you just said. Support, they are support. I think too many people hire a consultant and it's a fix-it. I got him, he's sitting there, don't worry, go see him. But it's our name. They don't say integrity monitor, they say the Port Authority has fraud and abuse. So never forget that. You can't, even if you have a candy store, you got to be there to be successful. So whether it's a major corporation or a small store, you got to be there. You got to be hands-on, you got to manage aggressively. And I think your point is excellent. This is where you really got to watch it now. We had occurrences as we were getting towards the end of the job where we were finding issues, I'd say, much less than the time it took to look at it and the charges we were done, if you know what I'm saying. Okay? So Ron and I took a step back and said, listen, we got to make a judgment call. If you're spending $10,000 to save, I'm making up numbers, $10,000 to save $1,000, you got to pull back. So you really want to get the sweet spot. You really will got to get to that point where you're really that sophisticated, and that's where we're going. The other thing, you said it, I'll say it a different way. You have monitors monitoring the monitors who are monitoring the monitors. It's become a cottage industry almost, and we have to be careful of that because that will hurt and undermine the good things that are accomplished with it.
Thanks, Leah.
I'll just give one anecdote about a sub that has a monitor. And the feedback that we got from the owner of the company was that they were appreciative that they had a monitor because now they had a resource to go to where they would ordinarily not call their outside counsel because they were going to get charged, per 15-minute intervals. They now had someone they could go to. And, before the monitor was in place, employee concerns were directed to the office manager who was generally in charge of ordering supplies. So it's a really good thing for companies, and I hope that it's a trend towards being more proactive about engaging a monitor instead of being reactive and waiting for a problem to happen before you say, we need some help.
Judge?
I would close as I open, I think, to continue down this path. Communication by the experts in front of me and next to me is the most important part of it. It's easier to do your job when you're doing it the right way and doing the right thing. Thank you for having me.
I think that the program that we have at the Port Authority and starting at the Trade Center and now expanding to other projects, and even though I'm not there any longer, my replacement Joe Piazza is in the room, Diana Lee is in the room, they handle these projects now, overseeing it. We've had a successful fraud prevention program developed, implemented, put in place. Integrity monitors, large portion of that. I'd like to think it's successful. I think that Steve Plate would agree with me that from the project executive side, that it's been a success. I think that there is a use for integrity monitors going forward. Cautioned by Diana's questions and inquiry as to whether integrity monitors might be going over that line, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed further in another forum. But thank you for having me today.
All right, I'll be the most popular ending comments by not having any, so we all can go. But I think everybody covered everything. I just want to say thank you for listening to us.
And thank you all. Thank you to my panelists. I think you did a great job.